Welcome back, everyone, to another edition of Taming the Perilous Skies, 100 Days to Launch. My name is Patrick Wimp. I am a screenwriter and a content strategist here at Spoken. For those of us who are kind of new to the series, this is a series for debut authors. We are tracking Phil's debut novel from manuscript all the way through to finished published work, across multiple formats, multiple platforms. Every week we're checking in with different topics with experts like Nancy Kress, who's joining us here. And then alongside that, Phil's providing daily check-ins as to his process, focused around that week's theme, giving us updates on whether it's writing, book design, marketing, genre, all the ins and outs of this journey. And so kind of bringing folks up to speed as to where we've been so far. Week one was about motivations, inspirations, and ideas. So why is Phil taking this on? Where did it start? Where did it come from? Last week, we talked about market and genre. How do you position your work for the market? How does genre play into that, genre tropes? And then this week is really starting to drill down and focus on the manuscript. How do we track when it's good, when it's ready to put out there? Is it good enough to send off? And so that's why we've got the wonderful and prolific Nancy Kress with us here today. Nancy has written 36 books, of which 29 are novels. Nancy has 6 Nebula Awards, 2 Hugo Awards, a Sturgeon, and a John W. Campbell Award. She's taught writing for over 30 years. And of course, we have Dr. Phil Marshall, the author of Taming the Perilous Skies. So welcome to you both. We're thrilled to have you here. And why don't you, Phil, tell us a little bit about how you and Nancy connected.
Thanks, Patrick. And Nancy, what a thrill and pleasure it is to have you on the call. And so I was at Worldcon in Chicago, and there was a panel of experts. And when Nancy said maybe 3 words, I said, that person there knows what she's talking about. And as a person who was preparing their debut novel, I'm like, I need to learn more from that person, because it's market, it's craft, it's how to think about your entire plot and character development and concept. And I was fortunate enough to basically stalk Nancy to Taos Toolbox, and was very, very fortunate to have been allowed into the 2023 class of Taos with her and Walter John Williams, and 18 of us. All of us have become good friends since then. We're blessed to learn a great deal from Nancy. And so thank you again, Nancy, for being here as we talk about when is good enough good enough.
Wow, Phil, I wish you'd tell me what those 3 words I said were. If it's that easy to convince people that I know what I'm talking about, I could use those 3 words.
I think maybe it was POV. My very first workshop, and it wasn't Taos, but my very first workshop, I had to raise my hand and said, you all keep talking about POV, and I don't know what that stands for.
Yeah, like any other discipline, writing has its own jargon, and it can look a little baffling if you're new to it. Yeah, I remember you very well, not only for your writing, but because you were a very lively addition to the class.
Yeah, well, I also supplied Pinot Noirs to the group as well.
That too.
So.
Always welcome, right? So as we kind of mentioned up top, Nancy, our docuseries is chronicling Phil's journey, but also kind of through the lens of, really assisting and guiding debut authors, encouraging folks who are almost across the finish line, or who are thinking about getting into that first work of fiction or that first novel. And I know, for me, when I was starting out as a writer, it was always really kind of inspiring to hear the early experiences of established writers. So could you just tell us a little bit about some of your first experiences writing fiction? Maybe your kind of, what we'd call a debut type experience?
Well, I started with short stories. I was stuck at home with a kid in a difficult pregnancy. And I started writing so I had something to do that involved more than 2 words of more than 2 syllables. And like everybody else, when they started, my short stories were rejected. They came back. I sent them out. They came back. I sent them out. They came back. Eventually one sold, a year later another. And I kind of inched into it. there are people who know from the beginning they're going to be writers, but I didn't.
Yeah, I think that's, very common. I think those are some of the people that we're speaking to. I know Phil, that first week we talked, there was a lot of the kind of it's never too late mentality, right?
Like it never really is. It really never is. Yes.
So, like as Phil said, and I kind of said at the top, this conversation about manuscript, right, and really figuring out like when is something ready. I know, when I was kind of studying filmmaking, there was this book and this phrase that said like, films aren't released, they escape, right? And so I feel like that's very appropriate for all kind of works of fiction, to some degree. And so I think it would be great if you could share just a little bit of your writing process. I know everyone's process is a little bit different, and so kind of just like once you've got that idea, where do you go next, and how do you kind of take it from there?
Yeah, I'm really glad that you use the word process, because knowing when a manuscript is ready to go out is intimately linked to whatever your writing process is. And those can vary enormously. Over all the years that I've been teaching, I've basically seen two students with a when do I send it out problem. One is the type where they never send it out because it's never good enough. It's never finished. And that's a little harder to tackle. The other kind is the person who dashes off the first draft, falls in love with it, which is a good thing for a writer to do, wants to know when the nominations for the Nobel open and send it off. This is not the best way to work. But again, it's linked to your writing process. On one extreme is a writer like Michael Swanwick. When Michael told me how he writes, I was utterly astonished, because this is what he does if he's working on a novel. He's a pretty slow writer. The first day he'll write maybe 3 pages. The second day, he reads over those 3 pages and then he revises them. And then he'll maybe add another 2 or 3. The third day, he reads over the first 5 or 6, revises them, and adds another 2 or 3. He does this all the way through. And I said to Michael, well, you can't read when you're nearing the end, you can't read the whole book. And he says, no, after I've done each section, each little chunk about 20 times, then it's pretty much set. So when he's finished with his first draft, so is the book finished. I could no more do that than fly. I would feel like I was cow chewing the same cud over and over and over for years. So no, I could not do that. The other end of the spectrum is where I belong. And these are the people who write like a man running past a graveyard late at night. Keep going very fast and don't look back. And that's basically my writing process for first drafts. What this means you end up with is a mess. So I'm a good person to talk about knowing when it's ready to send out, because my novels and even my short stories, although especially the novels, never are ready when I've finished the first draft. So this is the revision process that I use in order to get it ready. And it may be useful to you and it may not, because again, it depends on your writing process. I put away the whole thing for a couple of weeks, which is usually about as long as I can wait, because I can't work on 2 things at once. I know many writers who can. Catherine Asaro has told me that she works on up to 6 projects at once, and when she's bored with one or stuck, she turns to another. To me, this would feel like adultery. I can't do it. I'm married to this project while it's going on, and I can't do it. So what I do is I put it away for a couple of weeks, which is about all I can wait, and then I read the whole thing through. And what I'm looking for here is the big questions. Does the character develop? That's an important one. Is he or she, the protagonist, different at the end? Because my feeling is if they haven't learned anything and they're not different, and they're not affected by the events of the story, why should they affect me, the reader? Is the plot logical? Have I tried to fill in with coincidences or cheating or something like that so that I can get to where I want to go? Or do things actually flow with the formula of yes, but, and then there's a new problem. Yes, I solved that, but. It has to flow with that kind of. I look at the pacing. Are there big what I call tent pole scenes? Usually you need at least 2 of these on a novel. The first part of the novel sets up the situation and the problems, and then about a third of the way through, but that's very rough. And if you're a screenwriter, you know probably for screenwriting exactly what pages this has to occur in. It's a little more flexible for novels, but it's about a third of the way through. I need a big scene. I need a big scene where things reverse or things change or new information turns up or there's some act of violence. And act of violence is always good because it changes stuff. Raymond Chandler used to say, if you don't know what to write next, have a man with a gun come through the door, and then figure out what he's doing there. Well, I can't do that, but then I go on, is there a next tentpole scene holding it up about 2/3 of the way through, roughly? And then does the climax bring together everything that I've set in motion? Nothing important forces should be left out. And then does the ending show both a change in the world situation and in my character? Okay, the big stuff, in other words. Does my character have adequate motivation for doing what he or she is doing? Saving the universe, because boy, that sounds cool, really is not enough. You need to either be forced into it by circumstances or have a strong personal reason. Look at Star Wars. Probably Luke would have loved to become a Jedi Knight anyway and save the universe, but he has behind him the murder of his aunt and uncle on Tatooine. And then he has a certain growing feeling for Princess Leia, which alas is not going to be requited, and a growing feeling for Obi-Wan as a mentor, which is going to be requited. These are the big questions. That's the first pass. And then I sit down, heave a big sigh, and try to change anything there that doesn't work. Okay, that's the big thing, but it's not the only one. Stage 2 is I look at each individual scene. Again, I work on paper, so I'm doing this on paper. I've made the first big revision on the computer, print it out all over again. Look at each scene. Does this scene contribute to the plot? Does it also contribute to character development? Sometimes a scene can just do one, but it's better if they do both. Have I got too many quiet scenes in a row? Because the reader's attention, if you have 3 quiet scenes in a row, is going to wander. Again, as a screenwriter, I'm sure you're familiar with this.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you're going to have a couple quiet scenes, a quiet scene or a lump of exposition, which isn't necessarily bad, or a flashback, which is out of story time, you have to earn that with something exciting happening. So is the order of the scenes okay? Are there some scenes that are just in there because I love them, but they don't add anything? Kill your darlings. Those have to come out. Does each scene start, especially in a multiple point of view, is it clear at the beginning of each scene who the protagonist is for this scene, who the point of view character is, and how much time has elapsed since the last scene and where we are now? Okay, anyway, that's when I do that. If I got the right scenes in the right order, and does each scene end with a little bit of something that makes us want to read to the next scene? Okay. Now most of the work is done, but I go through a third time, and for this I keep a Bible. This is to make sure that my character doesn't have green eyes in chapter 2 and blue eyes in chapter 18, that the names are right, that I haven't repeated names that are too close to each other, that I haven't said a character is 16 and suddenly they're acting 35. I keep a Bible with what the characters look like, what their names are, what other people call them, how old they are, all that stuff. And then I will refer to and place names, and then I will refer to it. And this is actually an easy thing. And then the last run through is for the words. Are there any awkward sentences? Are there, can I sharpen any details so that he doesn't just have a dog, he has a Labrador retriever? Can I sharpen the images? Can I fix any awkward sentences? Can I make sure that I haven't been repeated something 3 times when the reader would have gotten it once? That's the last one is for the words. Then I read the whole thing again, and then I give it to my beta reader, who is my husband, Jack Skillingstead, also a writer, and he goes through it, and he will pick up typos and any awkwardnesses. He's actually better than I am at a sentence by sentence level, and he will pick any up that are still there. And then he'll title it because I'm rotten at titles. And then it's ready and out it goes. And again, it depends on what your process is. It may be that you do some of this rewriting as you go along.
Yeah, I really love all that, and it is always fascinating to hear. I was, when I kind of teach screenwriting at a couple of places, and I talk about a similar process to yours, where it's kind of like you let the unbridled left brain creativity go and go and go, and then you start bringing in these audits, right? To like, okay, now I have to evaluate, is this working? Phil, how about yourself? Any thoughts on process there?
Well, you saw me sort of walking around a little bit, and the reason is because something I should have had beside me, but didn't, but now do, is
Oh, the notes you took. Am I repeating myself? I hope so, because that means I actually believe it.
Well, so actually, what you said there sort of inspired me with the memory of the feedback that you gave me. Because we're talking about Taming the Perilous Skies, my debut author experience, and Tao's Toolbox played a really important role in that development. You know, you said, you know, this needs rewrite, right? It's got some problems. I thought characterization was my real problem. You didn't think so, actually, which was just, you know, it filled my heart to hear that. I still think that's my weakest part, but you said nothing first in these 42 pages, nothing happens. and I'm happy to report that I did add some in media res moments, tighten things up generally, but then put some in media res moments that gave immediate catastrophe, you know, feeling in chapters 1 and 4 that sort of give you those glimpses of terrifying, awful, you know, tragedy. And you inspired that. But the other thing that that I thought of as you were speaking was your process of sort of getting it roughly down and then going back through and making sure that, you know, structurally these things are all in place. It's a bit of if you go with the old phrase, pantser versus plotter, right? It's a bit more of a pantser, would you say, approach on your side?
It is, except I found that over the years, pantsing works for me for short stories. It didn't work very well for novels. I have novels in print that I no longer like. I have one that I think is so badly written that whenever these completists bring it up to me at conventions, I write in it, please don't read this. I've done better stuff before you sign it. And it took me a while to realize that complete pantsing seldom works for a novel. A novel is just too long. And it works better now if I know in advance. Well, I obviously know the beginning, because beginnings for me are easiest. But if I know the ending, and if I know what I just referred to as a couple tentpole scenes, big crises along the way, then I can go ahead. But pure pantsing, just plunge in with my situation and character and just keep writing, did not work for me at a novel length. Occasionally I could get it to work at a novella length, but that's as long as I could go. Now other writers may be different. I know that Ted Chiang never starts writing a story unless he knows the last sentence. On the other hand, Ted Chiang has never written a novel. So his short stories are wonderful, but he has never written a novel. So I don't know how it will be if and when he decides he wants to tackle that.
Well, in fact, we featured Ted Chiang on a previous episode of my personal check-ins, not as an interview subject, but I have his signed first copy of Stories of Real Life and Others in my entry of my home, just about 15 feet from where I am. And for that first week, when we talked about motivations and inspirations and what have you, I featured him, you know, quite a bit. The pantsing versus plotting, for those, you know, debut authors who aren't really familiar yet with those terms because of your self-published, maybe you aren't. Pantsers fly by the seat of their pants, right? They just go with the flow, and I think some genres may be more inclined to do that than others. I think with science fiction, I would imagine plotting is more, being a plotter is more common in that you've put out the basic architecture or framework of the story, and then you're writing those scenes. And so I'm probably a little bit more of an extreme plotter myself, an extreme outliner for the overall arc of the story, because I'm trying to get almost a techno thriller kind of pacing where I get reveals in certain ways that are also nonlinear. And so it's a little bit more of my approach. So, but as we're getting sort of back to when is good enough, right? So now, you know, with your own process, you've marched along, you've gotten to a certain point, but you've traditionally published all of your works, is that right? Or have you also self-published?
I've never self-published except in reprint. when the rights have reverted to me, because my early novels, being like older than God, some of my early novels were before electronic rights were even part of the contract. So I have done that, but no, I have not self-published. Although I think I may, because I've written a book that is a sequel to Jane Austen's Persuasion. I'm a big Jane Austen fan.
Yep.
Unfortunately, every editor who saw it in New York said the same thing. Well written, she has Austen's voice exactly, but unfortunately, the only sequels that sell are to Pride and Prejudice, not Persuasion. So I think I may self-publish it because I love the book. So
Well, so let's sort of get into the mind then. So you're going to be doing this as a debut self-published author yourself, and so
when I get it, yes,
yeah. So unlike traditional publishing, myself, for example, I wasn't fortunate like some of our other Taos Toolbox students who are now six-figure deals and multiple books purchased and all that. So. But I'm not in that camp. Okay, so as a debut author, the question becomes, and which is the question of our week, is when is good enough good enough, right? And so for me personally, it was lots of revisions. I continue to nibble at it, right? Because I can re-upload the EPUB for an update. I can redo the spoken audio work by just changing a passage here or there. I can do that just on the fly, right? I don't have to be stuck with throwing something over the wall and just being good with it, right? I can continue to nibble, but this first go, I want it to be really strong and as good as possible. And so what does that mean? For me, it was multiple revisions. It also was a separate editor that read through the work twice actually, and then also some beta readers. I also use Spoken to hear every chapter read aloud, which helps me to pick up all sorts of things, right? To hear it read aloud. But Nancy, for your process, and especially now that you're thinking about your debut self-published work, which is awesome timing. So what is your process for knowing whether good enough is good enough? You don't have that editor. So what do you do?
Well, I do in a way. If I go through all of that I've just described, by the end of that, the book is as good as I can make it at this point. And then if Jack, my husband, the beta reader, has any suggestions, I do that. But I also have an agent. And when my agent gets it, he sometimes have suggestions. And so that's another, I think it's done, but Peter doesn't. So then we have to go back and do that, work on that for a while. And I trust him, he's good. You can never really know when it's done, because as you just said, it's never really done. You can always go in and tinker with a little more, but that's how you end up in my first class of writer that I spoke to. It's never perfect, so you never send it out. I actually think this is more a fear of rejection than a desire to make it perfect. But rejection is part of the business. If you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. This is a rough business. It's not. I didn't know that when I started it. It's a rough business.
Well, let's talk about the self-published world, though, because rejection is a different kind of thing, right? Rejection is lack of sales. Rejection is negative comments on Amazon. Rejection
does no matter what you do.
Yeah, that's true. But rejection is a little bit weird, though, in the self-published world compared to just being rejected out of agents. I queried 120 agents with Taming the Perilous Skies and got rejected 120 times. I only had one full request on the whole out of the 120. The point is that all those rejections were just part of my journey. But when it comes to self-publishing and knowing whether it's ready or not, like I said, I hear it read aloud, so I pick up a lot of things there. I have ChatGPT go through to make sure there's no grammatical or spelling problems. And so what else will you be going through for your debut self-published work? You have your built-in beta readers with your spouse and your agent. So,
and also I have other beta readers sometimes that will look at it, and they can be very useful too. But usually I do that mostly when I have doubts myself about it. I don't read it out loud because I don't like reading out loud. And I'm not supposed to admit this, but I don't like being read to either. When I go to readings of friends, it's because I'm supporting them and I need to. But I don't. I read fast and I retain better when it's on the page.
Yeah, well, for me,
I know people who do and find it useful.
Yeah, well, it's more than useful for me, actually. I'm an audio only reader. And that's exactly how I say it. And
It's
that's one of the
really
reasons. That's one of the reasons I founded Spoken, is because of that motivation. And actually, it's interesting because audio is becoming the dominant modality of consuming written work. It actually passed ebook sales, audiobook sales passed ebook sales last year, and they're catapulting forward at 26% growth year over year. And so audio is becoming the way that people are consuming stories. I call it a reading, like it just is any other reading, although traditionally I know that that's not how it's described. But yeah, audio for me becomes a part of that process. But again, everybody absorbs story different, and so since we're on the topic of manuscript and craft, I do want to call out one thing. It's one of many things that at Taos was so incredibly helpful. I asked you, when it comes to the three things that I think about for a novel, and that is concept, its plot, and its character. You actually helped us to draw a three-dimensional, sort of grid on when it's strong on one but weak on another. Like you can still get by. But I think if I'm paraphrasing correctly, you said the one thing that you can't be bad on is character.
In my opinion, yes, but that's because I read for character. A lot of people don't. I was recently reading a book, I have to be careful here, as much of it as I could stand, by somebody who is making lots and lots and lots of sales. I didn't finish it because he was clearly not interested in characters. His character hurls from one life-threatening situation to another. And it's ingenious how he gets out of some of them. But he never changes. He never shows any self-awareness. He never has any doubts. He never seems to have any other relationships outside of this. He seems to exist in a sort of adventure vacuum. And I didn't find it interesting enough. But I know that not everybody feels this way, or this guy would not be selling so many books. Fiction lies on a spectrum, not a dichotomy, a spectrum between literary fiction and commercial. And the closer you are to the commercial end, the more important plot and a faster pace and a sympathetic hero become. And the more you are towards the literary end, your character doesn't have to be your protagonist quite as sympathetic. They can, in fact, be almost despicable if they're interesting enough. But what you have to have above average prose, because that's what we're getting. And you can do more exposition, you can do a slower pace, but you have to have good prose and an interesting character. And science fiction has both commercial, just pure commercial, and pure literary. And most books fall somewhere on the spectrum in between, which is okay. But if you are going to please me, and you did say me particularly as a reader, I have to be a little more towards the literary end to really, really like it, which means I need characters that are complicated, that have got some flaws, that I can say, oh yeah, I felt that way, and God, I wish I didn't. Because he wishes he didn't either. And without ever losing sight of the plot. This is why writing really good literary science fiction is so hard, and why I think Ursula Le Guin walks on water, because she pulled it off several times. And so is Kim Stanley Robinson.
It's interesting, Kim Stanley Robinson with the Mars trilogy, right? I mean, that's so that's one of those that really takes some high concept. And so it's they're big. So that's what I do with my own work, or what I strive to do is near future hard sci-fi that's very scientifically and technologically based. But as you go through it, through the characters' evolution and what they have to tackle, you surface some big philosophical and even spiritual.
Yes, I'm so glad you said that. Science fiction hard SF, and that's what I write too very often, because I write about genetic engineering very often. And I left this out when I'm going through my revision thing. I also have to make sure that I've made the science clear, but not too blatant. And this is when I said in response to one of your early comments, no matter what you do, you're going to get negative comments.
Ridicule, yeah.
Writing hard SF, it's especially vulnerable to negative comments because half of the readers will say, oh, there was too much science. I just skipped it to get to the story. And the other half will say, you know, I wish I'd had a little more science so that I could really completely believe this. You can't win. You can't win. You have to do it and hope that you listen to the feedback from your beta readers and hope that the same becomes the same as if you're writing historical novels. How much history, you're going to get the same sorts of responses. So that's another thing I try to check when I'm going through.
You know, that's a really interesting point. It reminds me of something that I know that you'll enjoy this story. So, so because Taming the Perilous Skies is based on my own theory in gravitational physics and how I've explored that and expanded that over many, many years, there are a lot of interesting sort of unexplored scientific ideas that haven't been fully vetted. And so I actually hired a NASA physicist, an astrophysicist, okay? And I said, okay, here are the excerpts that have these references, and I'd like for you to check them. And he got excerpts, right? These are just excerpts that have these references. And he's like, he did not reflect on any of the concepts, any of the scientific or technological points or mathematical or computational points. He instead said, you know, I really don't think you developed this character well enough in this particular case. I'm like, it's excerpts. They're excerpts.
But in a way, it means he thought your science was acceptable. If he had found anything that just set him off with the science being dreadfully wrong, he would have said so.
Well, kind of. You know, the truth is he marked some of them as wrong and then did not provide any on why, right? He had the little drop down to say it was wrong. Anyway, so it was an interesting though, because he became a Nancy Kress. It's like, oh, well, your character development really needs, I'm like, that's not why I'm hiring you.
You will get people like that who think that they can write it better than you could write it.
I told him, I said, I took class with Nancy Kress. You're not going to tell me about my character development. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think it's good, though, to go to experts. I wrote a book called If Tomorrow Ever Comes, and one of the major characters is an ex-Army Ranger. And I read memoirs by ex-Army Rangers who served in Iraq. This was a while ago. And I read the Army Ranger Field Handbook, and I can now build a field antenna, should I have to. But when I was done, I hired an Army Ranger, an ex-Army Ranger, which a friend of mine knew and found, to read it and to go over and tell me what I got wrong. And there were a couple things. He said, this isn't the weapon they would use at this point. And he picked, because I've never even served in the military. He also said, and I should have gotten this, snipers are up high. He's not going to be at the bottom of the hill. You have to.
That's a good point.
High. So that was the biggest thing that he found. But it was very useful. And hiring experts is when you don't have it yourself. Is really important.
Actually, that's a good point for our debut authors reading this, and whether your craft is good enough, is do you have parts in it that really do need to be independently reviewed?
Yeah, that outside review,
Yeah, I did the NASA astrophysicist, but also because I've got a major international crisis that's being led by the Incident Command Response at the U.S. I just happen to have a close high school friend.
Okay. Two questions. First of all, if you have a major international crisis, in the book, you mean?
Yeah.
How could you write 42 pages for your first draft where nothing happens?
Nancy, are you still beating me up about this? I told you I put the in media res scenes. I mean, I added the things.
Okay.
You learned.
Then what I was going to say is that a close friend from high school is one of the most senior counterterrorism FBI agents placed at Langley. So at CIA. And so she and I met several times to talk about what does the incident response look like. So I did that. And then my co-founder of Spoken happens to be a cryptologist, so knows quantum cryptography really well, which became a centerpiece to the culprit, the whodunit of the book. And then the NASA astrophysicist, who just makes for a great story talking about that one. But anyway, yeah. So the point though being that debut author, if you have some things to know whether or not it's good enough, if there are pieces of it that you really need to verify with experts, you should. Yeah.
I want to go back to something Patrick said a while ago, though. You said you're an outliner. right? Or was that you, Phil?
So I said I'm a
Probably
plotter.
Phil
Yeah,
said that.
I'm a to
You
to
make
a fault.
detailed
But
outlines.
I'm a bit of an outliner, you know, in my things. I kind of vacillate between the two in a way where it's like there's some structure, but I want to leave room for happy accidents and that kind of thing.
I just want to say one thing about that, and I think you just covered it, but I'm going to say it again. The students I have had who are intense outliners, the weakness to watch out for there is that you've made this whole outline, it all fits together, and so you don't want to change anything. And this kind of undercuts the point of revision as well as beta readers. An outline is a good thing as long as you can be what you just said, flexible about it. Sometimes a character will go in a different, unexpected direction, and then that's worth following. I had an argument with Connie Willis once on a panel about this, when I said just that a character will sometimes go in an unexpected direction, and that can lead to some exciting plot developments. And she said, Nancy, wait, she said, characters don't go in unexpected directions. I created them. They do what I tell them to do. Don't go in unexpected directions. And I said, well, all I can say, Connie, is it feels that way. And often I'll follow that unexpected direction, and it's better than what I had originally planned.
I do think characters can surprise you, right? I think that
for sure.
you've written something and something's like, wait a minute, what if they actually thought that instead? Isn't that more interesting? And by the way, I'd love to have been a fly on the wall when Nancy Kress and Connie Willis have this debate. Her signed first copy of To Say Nothing of the Dog is right over here about 10 feet from me, right next to Ted Chiang's story.
A lot of signed copies over there, Phil.
Yeah. So she's a bit of a hero of mine as well. Well, so I know that Patrick, we're getting up close to time, and I know that we're probably
really appreciate
the major questions, but maybe what I would ask Nancy of you is, does anything else come to mind as that debut author is asking themselves, am I ready to push this into the EPUB format and out on Amazon and Kindle and what have you? Is there anything else that comes to mind that they should question, ask, or be confident about?
If you've made it the best you can, and you've submitted it to knowledgeable people, agent, beta readers, editors, outside editors, whatever, that's really all you can do. It will never be perfect. There are no perfect novels, and not even Jane Austen or Ursula Le Guin. And you do the best that you can with it. And then the best thing you can do once you've put it up there, you have to continue the marketing. But the best thing you can do is move on to the next work. If you become obsessive over, will this sell? Or how am I doing? Or how many copies have I sold today? Or how many copies did I sell since half an hour ago, the last time I checked? You undercut your ability to transfer your allegiance from that book to whatever you're going to write next. And that's not always easy. It feels like you're sending a kid off to college or something. They're on their own now. You don't know where they are all the time. And God knows what they're getting up to. But at the same time, unless you do that, you won't be fully able to wed yourself to the next piece of work.